Welcome to Rob Wright's Gen X Pop Culture, and today we're going to talk about one of my favorite 80s comedies, The Three Amigos. I love this movie. I watched it all the time as a kid. I saw it in the theater. I remember going to see it in the theater. So back in the day, they had a reward for books you had to read in elementary schools, and the reward was sponsored by Pizza Hut, where you could get a free pan pizza by the number of books that you read in a certain amount of time. And I got one of those awards, and I remember it was like a Saturday afternoon. We went and got my free pizza, and then we went to go see the Three Amigos. So, yeah, I have a very good memory, and I'm full of unusual facts. So, yes, I remember going to see this as a kid. I remember those details just because I remember getting that award and getting that free pizza. So it's interesting. The stuff that I remember will blow your mind sometimes. It amazes even myself, but it's all stored back there somewhere. Anyway, let's talk about this movie. We're going to talk a little bit about the production, which is interesting. I got a lot of cool notes about that. We'll talk about some of the deleted scenes, which would have been amazing if they'd stayed in there. And then I've got a plethora, yes, plethora of facts and other information about this movie. And then I'll tell you my top 5 scenes in this movie. So let's get started. Let's kick things off with the production of The Three Amigos here. So it was written by Steve Martin, Lorne Michaels, and Randy Newman had a hand in it. According to Michaels, Martin approached him with the idea for a film and asked to co-write it. Martin originally had the idea of the Three Caballeros, which of course was the Disney short featuring Donald Duck as one of the Three Caballeros, and he wanted to do something similar to that. Newman contributed significantly because he came up with some great songs. So he came up with the Ballad of the Three Amigos, which you kind of hear during the movie. My Little Buttercup, which is a fun number. Blue Shadows on the Trail, which is another funny number. And the musical score was composed by Elmer Bernstein. So it was shot in various places. They shot it in Grants, New Mexico, the Simi Valley, California, Coronado National Forest, Old Tucson Studios, Clover City, and in Hollywood. John Landis directed it, and at the time, unfortunately, John Landis was in court for a trial over The Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone movie, if you don't know this, you may want to look it up. It's interesting. There was a horrific accident on the set where an actor and 2 child actors all died. And it was a significant lawsuit and a very big deal. John Landis was able to get through it, but it just was a terrible tragedy. And, John Landis has been known since and even before that as not the safest director in Hollywood. And we'll talk a little bit about that. If you want to look up more about that, I would say look it up. I'm not going to get into the details about that because it would take us on a tangent that would go way into another direction. And maybe if I do the Twilight Zone at some point, we could talk more about it. Anyway, so he was in the trial over that, and the studio was the one that heavily edited this movie instead of Landis. So you didn't get his full cut of the movie, which is why some of the cut scenes are pretty significant, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. So Steve Martin's performance of the lasso tricks in the movie were actually because he did work at Disneyland when he was in his 20s, and he would do lasso tricks in a cowboy outfit. And he said in one of his autobiographies that he had that he kind of got the idea for the Three Amigos because there was a part in Disneyland where there were these 3 performers who played Hispanic music, and they were really good, and he really got the idea from there and from the Three Caballeros. And he also saw a mural of a Hispanic cowboy from back in the day, and he just kind of had this idea of, hey, can I write a story about this person or maybe 3 people? And that's where he kind of came up with the idea for Three Amigos. The production went through many cast changes before filming. So this is interesting. Martin had been attached to the project since 1980. Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi were originally going to star. Can you imagine that? So Steve Martin was an early fixture as a guest on Saturday Night Live, and he did several cool performances. If you don't know it, look up King Tut. That is one of his most famous Saturday Night Live performances. It's hilarious. Go look it up. But John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd were staples in the late 70s, early 80s, especially as not ready for primetime players on Saturday Night Live. And there's several people from Saturday Night Live that are in this movie. So unfortunately, that never came to fruition. Unfortunately, we lost John Belushi at such a young age. I won't go into details about that, but it's such a tragedy. And then Dan Aykroyd was unavailable at the time of shooting, and I'll get into that. At one point, Steven Spielberg was set to direct. And here's what Steven Spielberg wanted. He wanted Martin, Bill Murray, and Robin Williams to play Lucky, Dusty, and Ned. Can you imagine that? I mean, Steve Martin, Bill Murray, and Robin Williams. I don't know if he would have been able to control the set. I don't think even Spielberg could have controlled that. I mean, that movie, oh my gosh, if you put those three together, that would have been zany. But I love what we got because I love Chevy Chase and I love Martin Short, and Steve Martin's a classic comedian, and I love him too. But wow, I just the thought of that is just pretty awesome. Landis has said that Rick Moranis would have been cast as Ned had Short not been available, which is really interesting as well. I don't know if I could see Rick Moranis in the role, but Rick Moranis is such a great actor, he could have pulled it off. When Aykroyd became available, Chase replaced him. John Candy was actually set for the role originally intended for Belushi, but it said that he was too large to ride a horse. So Candy recommended SCTV alum and friend Martin Short. And this was actually his first film role. So Martin Short had become close friends with John Candy from SCTV, and he became real good friends with Steve Martin. As a matter of fact, I think up until last year, I think they may still be touring during their comedy show together. If you get a chance to see it, I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard it's fantastic, and you can't go wrong with those two comedians. They're fantastic, especially stand up and all the witty humor that they bring to the table. Candy was seen riding a horse in the film Delirious, but he couldn't ride a horse for very long in this movie, and that's why he didn't want to do it. Steve Martin has top billing in some posters on the DVD, but actually Chevy Chase had top billing in the film itself. Martin reportedly developed tinnitus after filming pistol shooting scene, but in an interview with Pitchfork, he clarified that it was not from working on this film, that it had been over many years exposing his ears to loud sounds. So with listening to music and noisy crowds. So, it's interesting that things get reported, and then when you actually interview and talk to the actor, they can give you more clarity. There were difficulties between the main actors and Landis. Most famously, Chase refused to tell a particular joke that he thought would make his character look like a moron. This was not uncommon for Chevy Chase, and he had a reputation in Hollywood for being a little bit difficult to work with. It's also because Chevy Chase is a writer and has his own comedic background, and he just, for some reason, he didn't agree on this joke, and Chase agreed to do the line after Landis threatened to give it to Short instead. Chase recalled making a hideous insult about Landis's supposed lack of stunt precautions at a 50-foot cliff in reference to Landis's ongoing Twilight Zone trial, which Landis overheard live on live microphones, and it nearly started a fist fight. Can you imagine that? I mean, Chase was refusing to do a joke. Then Landis threatens to give it to Martin Short, so Chase relents and does the joke. Then Chase criticizes him on a live mic, and then Landis wants to get into a fight with him. That's just crazy, but this is Hollywood. Those are the egos and the things you live with when you're making movies. Chase later would say that making this movie was the most fun he's ever had. So there's that. So I guess it did work out. And he's hilarious in this movie. I love Chevy Chase. He's got so many great lines in this movie. and it's just a fun movie. I love this movie. It's great. Anyway, that's a little bit about the production. One other thing that Steve Martin mentioned in his biography that I read is that he, Chase, and Martin Short, during takes or during their downtime, they actually got together in one of their trailers and they were playing Scrabble. And when they called them back to set, they were like, "Hey, hang on, we're in the middle of a game." So pretty funny story. If you get a chance to read any of Steve Martin's stuff, I suggest you do it. He's got a lot of insights into his movies and some funny jokes and funny stories that happened while filming some of his wonderful movies. Anyway, let's go to the deleted scenes. Okay, let's talk about some of these deleted scenes because they're kind of amazing. So, several deleted scenes were included in the Blu ray release. So, like I always say, get physical media whenever you get a chance because you never know what's going to happen with streaming companies. They could remove it from the platform forever, they could alter it, and you don't want that. I would say always get physical media. That way you can watch it whenever you want and you'll have it. So, an alternative opening feature in Santa Poco being pillaged by El Guapo and his men, prompting Carmen's search for help, was included as a deleted scene. I don't know that it was really needed in the final film, but it would add more depth and more dire need to their situation. And it would mirror, the Magnificent Seven, which is kind of what this is a spoof off of. So it would mirror that a little bit more if they did that. Extended sequences of the Three Amigos at the studio mansion and the backlot led to another deleted subplot. So there was a subplot involving an actress that was up and coming, and she was a rival. Her name was Miss Renee. And unfortunately, that was completely deleted from the movie. She was played by Fran Dressler, and she can be seen still in the movie when they go to get their costumes. There's a big poster with her up on the billboard right there. But it was supposed to be a subplot of her being the up and coming actress, and the Three Amigos were kind of the old has-beens and kind of the out with the old, in with the new. That would have added to a little bit of their firing. I thought their firing worked really well anyway. I don't know if we needed that subplot, but it's interesting to see that. Anyway, like I mentioned, yeah, there's a billboard that shows that when they're getting their costumes. And then another number of deleted scenes featuring Sam Kinison. Yes, Sam Kinison, who was a comedian during that time, and unfortunately we lost him too early as well. As a mountain man, we're lost, as were many of Dressler's other scenes. So can you imagine them going into Mexico and Santa Poco and run across a mountain man in the mountains, Sam Kinison, as a mountain man bandit? That would have been hilarious. It would have been an interesting subplot. I don't know how it would really work in there, but that would have been funny just to see. Anyway, those are some of the deleted scenes. I would recommend getting the Blu-ray or the DVD if you get a chance. They do have a few cut scenes in there. It's interesting to see what the film would have done had Landis been able to cut the whole thing. Like I said, he was in trial and couldn't really do all the cutting. The studio did some of the cutting. The other aspect of this, in regard to the deleted scenes in the production, is that they were on a very tight budget as to when this film had to be produced and made. And that's part of the reason why the studio ended up cutting it. But also, they didn't expect it to be a big hit. They expected it to be kind of a flop. And it's interesting when you add all that together, it kind of spells kind of studio rushing to get it out so they can, either take a loss on it or they just get it out of the way and get another production going. So interesting stuff, interesting ways that Hollywood works. But that's it for the cut scenes. Let me tell you some other facts about this coming right up. Okay, so we have a lot of facts about this movie that I'm just going to rapid fire. They're so random and so miscellaneous that they really didn't go into any one particular category. So the guy who played Jefe, Tony Plana, he turned down Oliver Stone's Platoon because he'd rather not be in the Philippines filming Platoon when he could be at a five-star hotel in Tucson. Oliver Stone didn't talk to him for several years after he turned it down. which I thought was kind of funny. Um, the scene with the bats that they hunted down and got, that was actually fried bacon served on skewers, which is interesting. It's the only film co-written by Randy Newman. And then while singing the opening song, the Three Amigos simultaneously hold the high note for 14 seconds, which is pretty difficult to do. Pretty amazing they did that. Randy Newman did the voice of the singing bush, which is a very funny scene, and they actually had to digital alter his voice for that. The musical score was provided by Elmer Bernstein, who also did a rousing score for The Magnificent Seven, which, oh my gosh, if you don't know that score, go listen to it. Go watch the original Magnificent Seven from 1960. I love that movie. That's a very great movie. But it's so interesting that he did the score for this movie, which is a parody of The Magnificent Seven, which is really kind of funny and kind of interesting. The cantina at the beginning of the movie is called Cantina del... I'm going to butcher this. Brocaccio, which translated as Canteen of the Drunk or Bar of the Drunk. That's pretty funny. That's kind of hilarious. In his memoir, Life Itself, Roger Ebert recounted appearing as a guest on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson alongside Chevy Chase, who was promoting this film. During an interview, Ebert was asked what his least favorite film of the holiday season, and he replied, Three Amigos. Like I said, they didn't expect this film to be loved by the audiences or anything like that. It was really considered a flop. And Chase said, looking forward to your next picture, but later confided to Ebert backstage that he didn't think it was hot either. So Chevy Chase didn't think it was going to be successful either. And this proves it with Roger Ebert. So, see, very interesting stuff. John Landis said in Empire magazine piece that the studio took the film out of his hands post-production and edited it severely. So, like I said, that's what happened with it. For the silent film sequence, Martin Short, Chevy Chase, and Steve Martin wore makeup that whitened their faces and darkened their lips and eyebrows. This was standard for that era when films were shot with orthochromatic film, notoriously intensive to warm colors. Yeah, so back in the day, the type of film, they needed intense, heavy makeup in order to really stand out because the black and white was difficult to work with. And that's interesting that they actually did that. John Landis said that the singing turtle was his idea in the desert, which is interesting. They needed lots of animals, and the animals were on set with handlers. And that's just a funny scene where they sing Blue Shadows, and the turtle goes Night Ned. So John Landis has said that if Martin Short had turned down the role of Ned, as I mentioned, he would have taken Rick Moranis. El Guapo is Spanish for the handsome one. The name of the movie on the billboard and the scene where the Amigos break into the studio to retrieve their costumes is the Dueling Cavalier. This is also the name of a movie made by Don Lockwood and Lena Lamont in the classic Singing in the Rain in 1952. The cowboy in the bar who duels with the German and propositions Carmen is modeling after Luke the cowboy who appears on the cover of every album of 1970s band Pure Prairie League. So Pure Prairie League, if you're familiar with them, probably the most famous song is Amy. One of their mascots on all their albums is this cowboy, and the cowboy that they have that kind of hits on Carmen and that also duels the German is set to look like him on purpose. I guess they were fans of Pure Prairie League. I thought that's an interesting fact. If you know music, you know that. According to the closing credits, the silent film location was the Universal Studios backlot. John Landis said that picture was shot on one of Universal's oldest lots, which is kind of interesting. When the Amigos say their chants to summons the invisible swordsman, Lucky Day chants Farley, 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 which is a reference to the often hilariously mispronounced name of Dr. Michael Hoffaner, Steve Martin's character in The Man with Two Brains, which that is an interesting film by Steve Martin. You'll have to check it out if you see. It's not his best film, but it's interesting. It's different. One of several movie collaborations of husband and wife team John Landis and designer Deborah Nadelman. Uh, Once again, Sam Kinison did have a guest role, but he was cut out. On a celebrity edition of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Martin Short and Chevy Chase were two of the 10 celebrity contestants and remained the final two to be in the hot seat. When Short was in the hot seat phoning a friend, he called Steve Martin, who was in Mexico during the call. You can't make this stuff up. That's pretty funny. You get Steve Martin and you get Martin Short and Chevy Chase on a show. They're the last two left. Martin Short phones a friend who's Steve Martin, and he's in Mexico. It's just, you can't make this stuff up. It's kind of a funny thing. Rebecca Underwood is billed in the credits as Senorita Kissing Ned, which, wow, she's gorgeous. And we'll have a picture on the next slide of her. And she was a former Playboy Playmate, and she's actually known as Rebecca Ferrati, and has been the Playboy Playmate of the Month for June 1986, which is around the time that they were shooting this film. So the Three Amigos were offered 100,000 pesos to come to Santa Poco, which in 1920 was worth about 50,000 US dollars, which in today's money would be worth about 641,000. So it was a significant amount. Steve Martin has revealed that his favorite joke in the film was written by Randy Newman. It's when El Guapo opens his present and exclaims, "It's a sweater!" And we got a picture of that on the next slide as well. El Guapo's second in command, named Jefe, the word literally translates to boss. The scene where they sing Blue Shadows to Martin Short was inspired by the live-action opening of Pecos Bill segment of Disney's Medley Time, where they also sing a song called Blue Shadows while a group of animals watch. Steve Martin was said to be a fan of Pecos Bill. So, interesting. I don't know if you remember the Disney short Pecos Bill. That's kind of where they get that from. Once again, Steve Martin going back to his days working for Disney. The first film that Steve Martin and Martin Short starred in together, they would later collaborate in Father of the Bride 1 and 2. At the fiesta, after the Amigos' first encounter with El Guapo's men, Ned does a dance that is similar to the dance of his famous SCTV character, Ed Grimley. He did that on SCTV, and he had guest appearances on Saturday Night Live where he would do that. If you're not familiar with Ed Grimley, go look him up. He's a hilarious character, and he does the goofiest dance. And Martin Short does a rendition of that in this movie. The names of some of the films that the Three Amigos starred in were either singularly or together were Shooting for Love, Little Nettie Grab Your Gun, Those Darn Amigos, Little Nettie Goes to War, and Amigos, Amigos, Amigos. Alfonso Aro also starred in Tres Amigos in 1970, one of two movie collaborations of John Landis and Chevy Chase. The other one is another comedy that I absolutely love. One of my favorites, Spies Like Us. Maybe I'll do that on this channel. Let me know if you want me to do that one. I love that movie. That movie's hilarious. The name of the small desert town in Mexico was Santa Poco. The name of the village is spelled and pronounced as Santa Paco in the movie and the soundtrack. This is grammatically incorrect, as Santa is feminine and the word Poco is a masculine word. Since in Spanish the genders should match, the proper spelling would be Santo Poco, or San Poco would actually be the correct form used in Mexican Spanish. Due to the other conventional rules regarding the letters with which the name begins. I'm not fluent in Spanish, so I'll take that note for what I just read. Lucky Day's first gunshot wounds in his left arm and Dead Men's were plaid. Steve Martin kept getting shot in his left arm, which is kind of funny. So, like, in this movie, he gets shot in the left arm. He got shot in another movie in his left arm. So it's kind of a running gag. So, all right. So the first character in the movie's title is upside down exclamation mark, which is rare in American theatrical film title. In Spanish, it's normal, which is interesting that they had that. Critic Leonard Martin noted that villain Araro was one of the key bad guys in the Wild Bunch in 1969. Yeah, he was. He did play a key villain in that movie. His first movie collaboration of Phil Hartman and Steve Martin, who were also together in Sergeant Bilko. Nederlander is Dutch for Dutchman. Interestingly, assistant producer, coordinator Sharon Nederlander bears the same name. Kind of fascinating. The video and DVD guide said the film was a send-up of the Cowboy star, while Hallwell said it was a take off The Magnificent Seven. Moreover, Movies and TV video cassette says it was a spoof of Mexican bandit movies, while the rating and the movies that the picture was a spoof of B-Westerns. Further, Variety says that the film is a takeoff on The Magnificent Seven, which I think it is more so than anything else, and parodies the style of a number of other classic Westerns. Interesting stuff. Principal photography took place during January, February, March of 86. This is one of two Steve Martin movies with singing plants released in 1986. The other was another hilarious movie, Little Shop of Horrors. If you want me to do that one, let me know, because I love that movie too. I mentioned the part about the three caballeros. In the spring of 2018, a running reference to Three Amigos appeared in the Mark Trail comic strip. Over several days, Mark recounted the events of the movie as though they actually happened in the Mark Trail universe, which interesting. So Philip Gordon, who plays Rodrigo, and Brian Thompson, who plays the German's friends, both appear in Terminator. Didn't know that. 4 actors in the movie as movie executives have played roles in The Simpsons. So let's see. Steve Martin played Ray Patterson, which is the Garbage Man episode where Homer becomes the head of sanitation, which is hilarious. If you haven't seen that episode and you like The Simpsons, go watch that. It's called Trash of the Titans. John Lovitz has played several players in The Simpsons. Too many to name. Joe Montana is Fat Tony in several episodes. And, Phil Hartman, who died way too young, was Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz. So, kind of funny. One of them 1980s Western spoofs. The others were Rustler's Rhapsody and Lust in the Dust. So, 3 parodies in the 80s of Westerns. Despite notorious financial and critical failure of Heaven's Gate, the Hollywood films industry, within about 5 years of that movie, revived the auteur movie genre during the mid-1980s, a mini-cycle of Western movies. So basically, after Heaven's Gate, they kind of shut down some Western movies. But, such Western movies did make it through, but they really kind of shut down the genre in the 80s. But Westerns such as Silverado, Rustler's Rhapsody, Pale Rider, and Lust in the Dust were able to get made. Silverado is probably one of my favorites of that. Pale Rider is also very good with Clint Eastwood, but I really love Silverado. If you want me to review Silverado, let me know. That's a fantastic movie. When getting yelled at by Pflugerman, you can see Ned's lapel under his collar, which NN stands for Ned Nederlander. The movie's opening credit card says Mexico 1916. In research for the screenplay, the writers found out that since special effects and stunt work were non-existent during the silent film era, the actors in those films would actually perform complex and demanding tasks so they'd go on film. This is reflected specifically when Ned insists that he really is a master gunfighter when he's shown in the Three Amigos films, and proves it when he guns down the main German villain. And generally in that, the Amigos turn out to have a variety of odd but useful skills, which is interesting. It really plays back to the classic Hollywood where they did all their stunts. Couple other notes. The village girls see the bandits approaching. You can hear one yell, Madre de Dios, which translates to Mother of God. Martin Short starred in 2 mid-late 1980s comedies with the word 3 prefix in the title. The other was 3 Fugitives in 1989. When the Three Amigos freeze while they're at El Guapo's, to sneak past El Guapo's guards. The two henchmen are talking in Spanish about a recipe for a dish. So if you ever wondered what that was, that's what that was. Anyway, those are all the facts I compiled. Let's talk about my favorite scenes of this movie and wrap things up. Okay, so it is difficult to really come up with 5 favorite scenes from this movie because it's so great. But I'll try and do myself justice here. This is mainly based upon all the times my friends and I joke and say lines from this movie. It's always something. We're always quoting it in some form or fashion. But probably number 5 scene would be a combination of this when they go into the tavern and they mistake them for really heavy hitters because the German said that my 2 associates would be back and don't mess with them. So the Amigos try to entertain everybody by singing My Little Buttercup. Is actually kind of funny and hilarious. And then after they get out of that, they see the plane, and the mail plane joke is there too. So that's a funny scene altogether. Shows the talent of Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Chevy Chase all together. Just hilarious. My number 4 favorite scene. Spoiler alert for the ending. It's my ending when they put one over on El Guapo. And he's like, that was a good trick. Come closer. I want to tell you something. And then he shoots his gun and says, that was a good trip too. And then he dies. And then the other aspect of the ending is when all the girls are kissing all the guys. The very last girl that comes out is this beautiful woman who's up here in the corner, who I mentioned. She was in Playboy. And she's the one that kisses Ned. And the other 2 guys are like, where did she come from? So I thought that was hilarious. That was a very funny scene. All right, my 3rd favorite scene in this is actually the scene right over here to the left of me with the singing bush. So they have to go to the singing bush. They have to do all the chants to summon the invisible swordsman. And Randy Newman's voice, was digitally altered, but it's just hilarious to listen to the singing bush. And he's singing old, old songs, children's songs and stuff like that. And they all say the words and they fire up, and except for Chevy Chase. And he thinks it's ridiculous, and he says these words and he shoots, and you see the invisible swordsman, you see a thud. And great, you killed the invisible swordsman. And it's hilarious because what was that supposed to do? He's supposed to point the way to El Guapo's, and they ended up finding El Guapo's without it because they follow the plane. But it's just a funny scene, which shows them as actors, and also getting that scene was pretty funny. I'll throw this in there because I didn't add it on here, but the scene with the canteens is funny. Lip balm. So I'll say no more. It's pretty funny. All right. My next favorite scene is pretty much towards the end where they discover Dusty. It's one of the Galdern gringos. What is happening here? Amigos falling out of the sky, and then Ned falls out of the sky. And he gets into the altercation with the German, shoots him, and the gun flies up, and Lucky catches it. And he says, freeze, El Guapo, or I'll fill your head so full of lead you'll use for a pencil. I'm not going to curse or use profanity on YouTube, but you can pretty much figure out it if you know the movie. It's just a hilarious scene with them, how they get caught. Just that whole sequence is hilarious. Definitely watch that. And then my favorite scene is probably the one that we quote all the time. El Guapo's getting things together. He's waiting on the Germans to bring him some guns. Jefe is saying, hey, we've got a lot of things planned for your party. We've done all this. And he turns to Jefe and says, would you say I have a plethora of presents? And Jefe's like, oh, yes, you have a plethora. And then he goes to Jefe, what is a plethora? I would not think that you would say that somebody would have a plethora if you did not know what a plethora was. It's just hilarious. It's so funny. We used to quote it all the time to each other, and it's just hilarious. So I referenced it in this video. We had a plethora of facts. Anyway, it's just funny and fun. What are your memories of this movie? Did you like this movie? Feel free to leave quotes or your favorite scenes or favorite memories of this in the chat below. Please like and subscribe to the channel. and let me know what other movies you'd like me to review on this this channel. It's just a lot of fun. I hope you had a good time reminiscing about this movie, and we'll see you on the next video.